Hello, Internet. My name is Chamomile.
Cam, I'm not sure we should be doing this.
I mean, it seems like it would be rude not to.
Like,
Like, they set
I
this
think
thing
we
up
should
for us and everything.
leave.
I,
Like I get that it's been 5 days, and we're still not in Arkansas, which is really starting to concern me. But I think we should find a different motel. Like, I know that we got to this one, and there was that key with our names on it, and we found the room, and it had this recording studio set up for us. But like, there's nobody here. Like, I'm a little freaked out.
look, I mean, neither of us have really been outside since the before time, right? So clearly, there's just been some changes to the motel business since the last time we were traveling. Fuck Lacroix.
I,
We're gonna convince this thin blood that he can become human again if he kills Lacroix. I'm sure that'll end well for him, and it'll mildly inconvenience Lacroix. See, good things are happening to us. This is a great motel. We're gonna be great.
like there's nobody here, and yet the motel seems to be fully functioning. Like the lights are on, everything's clean. Though whenever I try to go to get ice, like the hallway to get to the ice seems to go on forever, and that's really annoying because you know how much I hate lukewarm water. I need my ice, chamomile.
Hey, hey, hey. I feel fantastic. All right, you feel
I
fantastic.
Oh god. I guess we'll do the podcast. We're not spending any more than a night here, okay?
Well, I mean, obviously, like it is a really nice hotel. I don't know what you're so concerned about, but I mean, it is a motel. You know, you stay here overnight, and then we're gonna keep on driving to Arkansas, which like you're really looking a gift horse in the mouth here. Like we've spent 5 days driving from Utah to Arkansas. That's some real bad luck. We must be continuously getting lost, which is weird because we've been sticking entirely to like freeways and stuff. But I don't know. I guess the freeway system is just more confusing than I thought. Uh, anyway, this is like the first lucky break we've had in a week. I don't know what you're complaining about.
I guess it's fine. Like I guess I guess I don't have an answer to that. I am gonna bar the door tonight, and I might sleep in the restroom, in the bathtub.
I mean, don't blame me when you have a stiff neck, and don't like damage the door or anything when you're barricading it like a paranoiac. Just we probably just called ahead and forgot about it. I do. Ever since I started doing this podcast, I have had just some weird memory problems. So that
Yeah, that
feels
is
like
weird.
Your city? Last time I looked, it was called Santa Monica, not stuck-up brick. Oh,
Like
visit you sometime.
we got to the motel, and the name of the motel apparently is just motel. Like it's not a chain or anything.
well, I
Like
assume that the
I'm
last
looking
one's
through this
left.
phone book. What?
Well, after the pandemic, I assume they're the only ones still in business, so they just rebranded themselves to Motel.
And like I'm looking through this phone book, and all the names are like they're just random combinations of letters. These are all ads for stores that I'm pretty sure don't exist
They must be having like a Russian spam bot problem. You know how you'll get the
in their
like
phone book.
on yeah. Well, I mean, I assume that phone books and Twitter are somehow linked now, and
Also, who has a phone book still? Like, why do we? Why is this even here?
they probably have some really old customers.
Also, I've never heard of a pizza outlet called Pizza Surf, spelled like the medieval peasant.
I mean, do you want to order some pizza from them? That sounds like it might be good.
I mean, I am kind of hungry.
Please come in. I do
Okay,
apologize
we'll
for
we'll,
my
we'll grab
sister's
some
prank
pizza
making
surf
you
between
feel
the.
uncomfortable.
You'll see, it's great. I hope they have Alfredo.
Especially scandalous, but in the club business, I suppose that kind of personality is a necessary evil.
So yes, this is Jeanette, Teresa's sister.
Therese Borman, yes. I'm the
Or
proprietor of this
Therese
club,
Jeanette's
and
sister.
the
We met
only
Jeanette
person
earlier.
who
This is
has
Therese. I get them
this
confused.
decided it's in your best interest to stay on. What brings you to
They're
St.
introduced right
Martin?
next to each other, and their names aren't that memorable. So fun fact: you can try to dominate her into this. That's a very bad idea. Like it won't give you a non-standard game over or anything. But
Tongue's exile is self-imposed, I assure you. But then, what reason would I have not to hate that loathsome Nosferatu scoundrel? Bloody Nosferatu. They're so...
Was she supposed to be British?
I can't tell. I almost wonder if she's supposed to be like an American who's trying to do a bit of a British accent. Like she's trying to be subtle about it, but
So in Dreamcatcher, the movie Dreamcatcher, which is the adaptation of the Stephen King book, there's the villain character who, oh god, I can't remember the actor's name. I'm gonna have to look this up, and it's gonna be embarrassing when I not remember this actor's name.
Why would I do that? Let him think I mean to kill him. That way I don't have to worry about him sabotaging everything.
Morgan Freeman. So Morgan Freeman plays the villain, and
okay, so
he speaks with it.
You remember which version of Simple and Clean was used in the Kingdom Hearts ads that you saw a decade ago? Again, for a game you did not play, you forgot Morgan Freeman's name.
I mean,
okay, yeah, no, sure. Please continue.
Nothing about me is uncanny, chamomile. But Morgan Freeman's character, he speaks with a completely normal American accent, and yet he's constantly using like Britishisms, like cuppa and bloody, and I'm like, was he supposed to be British and they just didn't tell Morgan Freeman, or is it supposed to be some weird thing he's doing? Like, what is going on? Like, I haven't read the books. I don't know if the character is British in the book, or if he does this weird tick in the book, but it was bizarre.
Yes, ghosts exist. Werewolves, mummies, and I'd expect a whole lot of other things I've never seen share them.
But there are mummies in this game?
There is a mummy in this game, yes. He turns up near the end.
Is he romanceable?
I don't know, but we're going to find out.
Rumor is that a personal item of a ghost may be used to draw it out or excise it from its haunt. While I don't put a lot of stock in hearsay, it's my last option. So I want you to go to the ocean.
What you could have done with these characters is had, like, this one speaking the mid-Atlantic accent, which was a sort of fake accent that was used in movies in the 40s.
Yeah, I almost wonder if that's what she's going for, because, I mean, if so, she's missed it by a mile, but it is, the mid-Atlantic accent is this kind of, like, half-British accent in some ways, so...
And, like, if she was using that, it would imply that she's, like, this is... to some extent an act. This is not her who she is really.
Right, which is definitely, you know, you definitely get the idea that she is, you know, putting on this act, that, you know, she is trying to seem impressive, trying to seem in control.
Before I forget, take this. The only way to reach the ocean house this time of night is through a tunnel in the sewers. You'll need that key to open the gate for that tunnel.
I mean,
if you'll excuse me, I've got situations to set straight.
Presumably, like, there's a gate that just gets locked that you have the key to.
Right? This is clearly a gameplay artifice that, where it's just, you know, they didn't have any good place to put the entrance. They probably designed the hub level before they worked out the details of the specific mission. And, you know, an entrance to a oceanside hotel is pretty conspicuous and hard to add in at the last second. So I'm assuming this whole bit was written to try and cover that up, which it's definitely, you know, it's a nitpick that you bring up when you're going line by line like we are, so I don't super begrudge the game for it, but it is kind of ridiculous that you have to go in through the fucking sewers to a building that she owns.
Yeah, the thing about these nitpicks is sometimes whatever it is there for a reason. Like, people complained about the long elevator rides in Mass Effect because they was hiding a loading screen, but it was like, that was more interesting than an actual loading screen.
Yeah,
like, you got a little conversation, a snippet of character development. Like, that was fine compared to, oh, it's just a picture of the Normandy for a couple, like, 30 seconds. I'd rather have the long elevator ride.
Yeah, like, I would rather have the 30-second elevator ride with maybe a bit of dialogue rather than a 30-second loading screen, which is what you would have gotten instead.
Which is what you get then in Mass Effect 2.
Right.
And presumably 3, but I did not play 3 because did not hear good things.
Yeah, I did play 3. Like, I can't remember if it had loading screens. It's not really something I look for, but, like, I would be surprised if it didn't. Just, like, the fact that I don't remember any special loading trick suggests there were probably loading screens that I completely forgot. So, here we are at the Spoop Hotel. In the game, Requiem, we're fine.
That's what you keep saying.
Yeah, fantastically well-designed level. Which I was about to go straight for the part that gets us, because I know that this front door is locked and we need to go find a key, because I've played this before. But, that's not the intended experience. The intended experience is that you see a front door that's quite well lit. That's obviously the place you need to go. So, you head up there.
Have you noticed that the dresser in our room is fake? Like these, it doesn't actually have drawers. These are just painted on a like block of wood.
It's got to be one. So it's one of those things where like you'll as like a lawyer or something, you'll have a bunch of books in your office just to sort of make you look very respectable. You have many leather-bound books in your office. It's totally unnecessary these days. Like, everything is digital anyway. And even back in the day, you would rarely need to have more than maybe one shelf's worth of books of actual law for, 90% of cases. I guess, like, they couldn't afford a real dresser. And who stays in a motel for more than one night anyway, right? You don't need a dresser. You can just use your suitcase. It's fine. Everything is fine.
Also, like the Gideon Bible that they have, it just says "Lorem Ipsum" written in it again and again and again, like, and not like printed out. I mean, like somebody wrote down the "Lorem Ipsum" phrase throughout. Like this is like several hundred pages.
I have to assume that this is the work of an extremely dedicated anti-theist. Which, I guess I can admire how thorough they are. Like, I might not necessarily agree that the Gideon Bible is, like, that repulsive that it needs to be entirely replaced. But I can certainly admire their thoroughness, their willingness to handwrite Lorem Ipsum across several hundred pages. That's not weird at all. That's just perfectly normal.
It's fine. Let's focus on the other spooky hotel.
Yeah, which we went and got the key from the front door key from the shed, and
again, why we couldn't have just been given it.
Now, we saw someone running down here, but now there's no one here.
This whole thing is very, very The Shining. Which I have not read the book, but I have watched the movie.
Rude. The ghost, that just flung a light fixture at me. Yeah.
Stephen King is not a fan of the movie for whatever
really?
reason. It's because like the book is sort of like about his struggles with alcoholism. So Jack is kind of a representation of him, and in the book, Jack gets his redemption. In the movie, Jack doesn't. So I could see why King would feel like kind of personally affronted by that. But the impression I've always gotten from people who've read the book and seen the movie is legitimately better anyways.
That is what I've always heard. Yeah. Get another little...
Not read a lot of King's writing other than It and the Tommyknockers.
Yeah, so it's pretty clearly established very early on here that there are two ghosts. One is whispering warnings to us, which are much easier to make out with the subtitles on. Although I think it's much more effective without the subtitles on. You get these whispered warnings that you can't quite make out half the time. But you definitely do pick up that someone is warning you. Once again, the whole disappearing ghost trick. And so yeah, you got one ghost who is on your side, at least to the extent that she seems to recognize you're here to help. And then the other ghost is trying to do a murder on you.
Again, the fact we cannot naturally see in the dark is kind of dumb.
Yeah.
Having trouble with these locks.
So yeah, Auspex does actually slightly lighten our vision here. Which we have a bunch of XP, so... perception contributes to range combat. We're going to want some of that eventually. Does that help? That helps a bit. So that's a game mechanic. Yeah, that lock in particular, that's a level 8 lock protecting this room. I'm not sure what from or what for. There's some newspaper clippings you can pick up from certain rooms. Oh hey, the ghost has trapped us inside. Ah, here we are. Child's severed head found in hotel laundry room. Another cool effect there. You can see the two ghosts fighting over the door for a second. And it is, we are just ruining this. I should have put this up front. I might edit something in. If you have any plans to play Bloodlines, for the love of God, play this stage first before watching our commentary on it. Because we are just... we're going to absolutely destroy it here. By, you know, picking apart each little bit. Boiler rooms are usually perfectly safe in ghost stories.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, good
Fine,
news.
it's fine.
Ow.
It's
So
boiling
yeah.
water. Why would that hurt us? We're dead.
I mean, maybe it was the screws being popped out that hit us. I don't know. But the important thing is we got the lights on now. Like, thank God.
Thank God.
Which also means the elevator is working. Now, the weird thing is you have to use this. Like, you get inside, the bad ghost laughs at you, but there's no other
That
way
laugh
out.
was
And
a little bit. That laugh was a little bit haunted house. Like,
yeah. He tricked me. And it's funny, in terms of gameplay, this whole thing is basically just a trap gauntlet, where, you know, you want to try and avoid you know, what are basically landmines, you know, just environmental hazards, and then heal past them if you can't. Second child was chopped up like firewood.
That's probably fine.
Yeah, I mean, this just feels like a thing that children would draw. Oh, god damn it. There we go. Okay.
That's
Now,
probably
which
fine as well.
ghost do we think wrote this? Do we think it's the good ghost or the bad ghost?
Probably the good ghost because she wants you to leave so you'll be not be in danger.
That makes sense. Fuck her, though. Yeah, let's run over to there and tell her that we're evicting her. We can't get out until she leaves.
So when you played this, Cam, did you enjoy it?
I mean, enjoy is perhaps not the right word. I definitely, like, it was engaging. I liked it. There we go. Oh.
You just shook your stake at the wood. The wood is so frightened it exploded.
So he apparently set the place on fire when he was done.
But you liked this level, is what you're saying.
Yeah, no, I absolutely loved this level.
What was the emotion you experienced when you were playing it?
And I did play this when I was like 17, I want to say, several years after it came out. But I was constantly spooked out by this place. This was very effective. It was a virtual haunted house, and it worked really well on me. Again, partly because as a teenager, I was more vulnerable to this kind of thing, I guess you might say.
But you liked being spooked out, is the thing.
Yeah, no, it did exactly what it wanted to do. To briefly summarize this diary, so we don't have to waste too much time on it, they go on a vacation to a hotel, and the plot of The Shining ensues.
I mean, basically.
Yeah, the father goes crazy, kills both children one after the other. The wife grows, more and more concerned as his mental state devolves, and then she, being a video game character, when she is trapped in a room with a killer coming after her, she stops to write in all caps how terrified she is, rather than seek some manner of escape.
So is fear a good emotion to experience? Like, we usually think of fear as being bad, right?
Right. And I mean, I sure hope you have an answer for that, because beyond the obvious fact that people do watch horror for fun, so like, clearly yes, and yet, being scared of real danger is considered like it's obvious why being in real danger in like an action game is it's obvious why that doesn't work the same way. It's because you're not in real danger and you know it. So yeah, I know. I'm stopping to do a podcast real quick. Relax. But it's obvious, like in some kind of shooter game, or for most of the vampire game for that matter, you're in this treacherous vampire conspiracy, and you get all the you sort of get to feel like an awesome vampire who is playing this game of cat and mouse, but you're never in any actual real danger. But the thing with fear is that fear is a reaction to being in actual danger, and simulating that is somehow still entertaining. Like, I don't really have any idea how it works, but
Aristotle had a theory about catharsis, about seeing stuff played out and having it not happen to you, bring about a feeling of relief that it's not happening to you.
I mean, I'm pretty sure that's wrong on the grounds that Aristotle said it, and when has that guy ever been right about anything?
I mean, I just please, let's not, just because I'm afraid his ghost is going to show up. Like, we have had that problem.
That's fair. Okay.
Like, I don't know. I do feel like we could take the ghost of Aristotle pretty easy. I'm primarily concerned about the ghost of Karl Marx because I think he'd kick our asses.
I mean, okay, I was halfway towards getting into a criticism of Marxism, but I'll leave that one alone because I assume that Karl Marx, if he shows up, he's a communist. So obviously he's going to show up with like the ghost of a million dead revolutionaries, right? Like he's not the kind of egomaniac like Freud or Aristotle who's all about his own brilliance and is going to show up alone to personally try and put us uppity little critics in our place. No, he's going to show up with the revolution, and I don't think we can handle that. Like so.
I think there's also been some stuff done in sort of evolutionary psychology, like the natural state of humans does have a lot of tension in it, and having especially like in modern times, we live relatively tension free, and that's not like like when you have a domesticated animal, you have to enrich them. Like you basically do that by stimulating some activity they do out in the wild. Like if you have a cat, you like have them play with a laser dot. What they're doing is, but essentially play acting at hunting the laser dot. There's a
Right.
discussion to be having about,
Which you would think that the cat would be happier not having to hunt. The food is just inert and available at their leisure. But
like
the instincts for hunting are, despite having arisen out of an environment of scarcity and potential starvation, the instincts for hunting do need to be satisfied to have a fully satisfied cat.
it's like part of what turned me off to Pokemon eventually is the games eventually got so easy they just weren't enjoyable after Black and White. Like Black and White was the last one that put any effort into it being challenging. X and Y and then Sun and Moon are just a cakewalk. So it's not enjoyable, even though like, oh, you're winning, you're winning. It's like, well, I'm not doing anything. I'm just hitting buttons with no
Yeah.
pattern. I can do whatever I want, and there's no challenge, so it's not enjoyable. Like people like Dark Souls because it's really difficult, and you feel some sort of satisfaction when you accomplish it.
I think there's a window I can open somewhere.
Like horror is a genre. It's been a thing for like people have told spooky stories for years. Like the modern horror genre comes out of the gothic genre in the early 1800s, but like you can look at stuff before that, and it's like the point of the story was to be kind of spooky, to be kind of unsettling, like Macbeth, or I think Aristotle might have been the person to record one of the first ghost stories, even uh, about a house being haunted in Athens. But
Which was
like
a
there's
valuable
obviously
and interesting contribution to human history because Aristotle was great. Please don't come and annoy us from beyond the grave.
but even like outside of the horror genre, like if you're a skydiver, you don't go skydiving because you find it completely safe and you're not afraid. You do it because you are afraid and it's enjoyable to be afraid. People who are daredevils don't do those activities because they're completely without fear. They do it because they find the fear kind of enjoyable. There's some positive effect of fear. Fear is directly related to the emotion of excitement, which is a good emotion, which is encountering the unknown. Frequently, it's triumphing over it, but not exclusively. Like just having some encounter of something new and unknown, and something we kind of crave. And you can also think about like fear does have a valid evolutionary purpose. Fear is what keeps us safe. And out of this specific conversation, I want to transfer into a conversation of the Magnus Archives. So
I mean,
there's going to be spoilers.
I was about to say, do people not go skydiving in order to confront the vast in some manner? Like, either to attempt to attempt to become its avatar, or else perhaps simply to investigate it in some manner. Like I figure the vast has got to be involved somehow or another. Is that? Am I incorrect in this assumption? Is that, I mean, I don't go skydiving, so this is just
I mean, I don't either.
okay. Then I'm going to stand by my that they are attempting to either confront or embrace the vast.
I mean, I'm a servant of the lonely, so I wouldn't know. Uh, Also, forget I said that. You don't remember me saying that.
Sorry, what were we talking about?
We're talking about the Magnus Archives, which is a fictional thing.
Are you sure? I'm pretty sure I remember being overtaken by the hunt at some point.
That might have just been a vivid dream you had. But so for our listeners, we're going to spoil some of the Magnus Archives in a second. So if you're interested in...
Yeah, the Magnus Archives is a fantastic, apparently fictional... I thought it was a documentary, but it's a fantastic and apparently fictional horror podcast. I highly recommend it. You should definitely go and listen to it. I'll figure out what timestamp we need to skip to and put that in editing here that you can skip to get past the spoilers.
Yeah.
I'm also going to figure out how to actually advance this at some point.
You're going to attempt that while I talk about the Magnus Archives.
Luckily, we've got so much material for this playthrough that we can go ahead and get stuck on something and still have stuff to talk about for like 15-20 minutes while I figure it out.
So in the Magnus Archives, you have these various encounters with these supernatural entities, and what you eventually discover is that all the supernatural encounters, their source has been these 14 entities, each of which is the embodiment of a different type of fear. So you have the End, which is the fear of death. You have the Lonely, which is the fear of being alone. The Vast is the fear of things that are like big, like sort of like bigness, essentially. Like, I'm sure there's a better way to put that, but
the Vast is sort of a fear of insignificance in the face of enormity. Like, I think the most, probably the one that comes up on the internet the most often is thinking about the size of the universe and human insignificance in the face of it. Like, people like to talk about that.
So they're all embodiments of these fears, and we receive from characters, they say specifically, they're just the embodiments of fears. They aren't connected. They're just malign, and they're just connected to fear. And you also have people who serve these fear entities called avatars. What makes you become an avatar isn't super clear. There's parts where it seems like having a monomamite... I'm having a... You might have to say this word.
Monomaniacal.
Monomamite... What Chamomile just said. Obsession with some aspect of one of these fears. So if you have a person who is, obsessed with hurting others, obsessed with causing pain, they might become an avatar, the Desolation, which is the fear of sort of pain and being personally targeted and personally destroyed. Though in practice, the avatars we see, some of them just become avatars like just from having read one of these books that is sort of an embodiment of the fear. So like there's this one episode where it's the record of a person who found a book that was just titled Dig, and they read it, and it didn't seem like they were really obsessed with digging before, but they read it and they became obsessed with digging. They became an avatar of the buried, especially if avatars
just completely lost in shadow. Okay. This game's lighting. There's a console command to increase the lightning, and I may end up digging it up because this is getting ridiculous.
Yeah, especially there's no way to increase the lighting. Like, you can't have a flashlight.
Yeah.
And also, vampires should be able to see in the dark. Come on.
Right?
Or like, Emil and I have talked about this for the End, which is the fear of death. It doesn't seem like the End should have avatars at all. Like, any interaction with death is based around your fear. You don't really serve it.
Yeah. Uh, the only
There's
way
this
to actively embrace the end is to die, which,
too. Like, if you were really obsessed with death and you wanted to embrace it, you would just commit suicide.
like, and that would be a real compelling and spooky thing for the end to do, where it just immediately kills all of its avatars. But that does kind of mean that they don't really have any avatars on account of they all die immediately.
Like, there's this one character who comes up in a later episode, who the fandom has identified as being an avatar of the end. Who I have some issues with that designation because she's not really an avatar of the end so much as she is a perpetual victim of the end. She is constantly afraid of death. She kills people constantly to feed the end, but like, those people aren't afraid of death. She's the one afraid of death.
Yeah, they get blindsided. Like,
Yeah. Or like, because like the end seems to pick its avatars. Like, there's another character who called Oliver who has these visions of tentacles, and when he sees them on people, those people die. But he wasn't really obsessed with death. It's just something that started happening, and he's the one who is in fear of death. Whereas somebody like Jude Perry, she just was a sociopath and was able to find a god who loves sociopaths.
right.
But then you also have somebody like Jane Prentice, who's an avatar of the corruption, who is the entity of sort of like filth and infestation. She didn't seem like she was like obsessed with those things. She just like got infected by a hive. She
came to be obsessed with them, but it's like with the thing with the books where contact with the supernatural gave her the obsession. The causation points the other way on that one.
Yeah. So like, some of these people are just victims. I don't like the whole thing where like any contact with the supernatural inevitably turns you into an avatar, and like there's a couple of points where like the characters in the show really try to push forward the idea that avatars all have free will and agency and made the active choice to become avatars, which does not seem to be what the actual evidence in the show supports at all.
Does not seem to be true, particularly of Jane Prentice. Like, she clearly seems to have been taken over by something.
Yeah. Like, it's the show, like, as much as I love the show, it really has a telling instead of showing problem sometimes. You'll have characters just give you information about the setting that honestly seems to contradict what is actually going on in the setting. And while that could be an example of just flawed writing, I am far enough in... I mean, that could be a good example of, like, characters having a flawed understanding of the truth of the universe. I'm at the point where I think some of it is just flaws in the writing.
Yeah.
I'm not going to spoil things to chamomile, but I can say that.
And there is, like, I think most of the way through season 3 at this point, so I'm still... And they're releasing season 5 right now as we record this. So,
But
I mean, that's only the vibe that I get. Like, if it turned out that some of the stuff they had told, that they had revealed so far was misinformation, mistaken, or just outright lies, then my thinking would definitely not be, oh, it's a wilderness of mirrors and I don't know who I can trust. My thinking would be, this was a clumsy retcon. So, yeah, definitely feel the same vibe where the disconnect does not feel intentional at all.
But going back to avatars and the liberatory power of fear, like, it seems like you could have avatars, because mostly they just all seem to be pretty terrible people, and they seem to, their relationship to the fear entities seems to be like, well, I make people afraid and to feed this thing, even though some of them do have different, like, ideas of what they are. Like, you have Jude Perry, who is part of a cult that anthropomorphizes the desolation as a specific god. But then you have people like Michael Crew, who's just like, well, I feed people to the vast. Occasionally I get magic powers out of it.
Yeah, like, I mean, he just seems to have made, like, I don't want to say a bargain, because that's gonna make it seem like, oh, it's some kind of devil's bargain, some kind of terrible supernatural pact. Like, he just seems like he signed a regular contract, like it was a mafia contract, but still.
But like,
Therese
people
is
could
out to
have
show of how well her lips
different
ever
relationships
kept
to
to see
these
the
fears.
Casanova. Did you
Because
happen to
both of
find
you, the
some
one, because we
charm
talked about the
to tell us
liberatory power of fear. You could see somebody falling to the desolation,
Ooh.
like a daredevil, and maybe their powers is like they don't. There's no reason they have to kill people or permanently send people into the vast, like the one guy that Michael Crew sent onto the eternal ladder. Like you can imagine a person just like as a part of their feeding process, and maybe even coming up with a seemingly pretty good justification for it, where they give people these experiences of fear, but they get pulled out, so they're just like, oh, I'm just pushing people to face their fears. Like you can imagine a vast avatar who's just really into the excitement and is perfectly willing to occasionally drag people along with him. And it seems like that should be a perfectly reasonable way of feeding the vast. It shouldn't all end with,
And there is
death.
the Magnus Archives wants these entities to be purely malicious, and as horror entities, that makes sense. The problem is, fear doesn't work that way.
And then the other thing is like, even within the descriptions of these entities, we see glimpses of them having connections to other emotions. Like the flesh and the corruption both have this weird undertone of like love and acceptance. Like Jane Prentice, once she gets infected, she seems to sort of feel like, oh, the endless plane of wriggling worms understands me in a way that nobody else does.
Right. It's what's his name? It's a very Nurgle kind of a thing from Warhammer 40k and Warhammer Fantasy, of like, yeah, the plague god brings plague, but he's the only one who loves you, and the plagues are his presence. A couple of the Magnus entities actually feel like interpretations of 40k Chaos Gods that are better than 40k Chaos Gods usually get.
There's even, I don't know if you've gone to this episode, but this is just a single episode, so I'm assuming okay to kind of spoil.
Yeah, it'll probably be fine, and it'll be good for the podcast, so.
Like, there's an episode where it's an incident in France, and this guy, he was a bartender, and he had never had a relationship. He was, like, in his 40s, he was unmarried, and he starts talking to his coworkers about, oh, he's finally met a woman, and she has a lot of children and he's like, oh, but I love them as my own.
Oh, no, I've heard this one.
Okay, I wasn't sure where in the series it came up, so I was a little like, I'm not sure if Camille started this or not. But, like, the eventual reveal is this woman is a bug who
Right.
he's fallen in love with.
Yeah, now he keeps referring to her as, like, his little beetle, and she's literally a little beetle.
And, like, within the context of the Magnus Archives, he's an avatar spooking out this other guy to feed the corruption fear, but, like, his actual motivation could just be he sincerely is in love with this bug.
So yeah, that's how it came across to me. Like, my understanding was that he was just sincerely in love with this bug, and the other guy was spooked out, like, entirely as a side effect.
Like, having the fear be the motivation kind of ends up overwhelming some of the more interesting, more complex motivations.
And it is also in the episode where they established this, the sort of Jonathan Sims, the protagonist, who is, he's an investigator, and so naturally, which works well, by the way, since we're digging a lot into Magnus's flaws, I feel like we should stop and bring up one of the good things, because I do still highly recommend this Magnus Archives. It is great.
Yes, I really recommend the first 4 seasons.
Oh God, things turn to shit in season 5.
Does that count as a spoiler? I'm sorry.
I mean, I'm not. I don't think so. If things got bad in season 5, then I want to know in advance so I can brace my. Like, I'll probably still, if I've gotten through 4 seasons of it, I'm gonna finish it. But
maybe you'll have a different opinion than I do. I've really not liked season 5.
Well, I guess I'll see when I get there. But so Jonathan Sims is this he is an investigator. He has the same motivation as the audience, which is that he wants to find out what's going on here, and he works very well. And he has his own distinct personality, but his objectives are aligned with the audience, so he works very well as a sort of an audience avatar in that way. So he's talking to someone who knows all this spooky stuff, and he is an avatar, and he is asking about, like, oh, if there are these fear entities, then, there's nothing particularly special about fear as an emotion. Are there any entities for other emotions, more positive ones? Hope is the one that gets brought up explicitly, and they say, and the other guy says, no, it's only fear. Now, I can see why you want that for your horror setting, right? The Magnus Archives would not be better off if there were entities of joy and sadness and so forth. But it kind of feels like prioritizing fear in this way is like, it's clearly a horror movie thing, right? Where it's like, oh, we're a horror show, therefore we must have fear be the only entities out there. Like, they need to be malicious, otherwise this stops becoming a horror thing and it starts becoming just an urban fantasy. But coming out and saying it, like, it probably better off just to, even though it's out of character for Jonathan Sims, just hand wave away, just quietly have him never bring up that possibility. Because coming out and admitting, like, yeah, you don't, there aren't any entities of other emotions, and the reason why is because you're living in a horror podcast.
It's one of those things. It's like when Pokemon tries to address the fact that this is a cockfighting game thing, it just always looks bad. Like, the better thing is to just not address that ever.
Right.
And even, like, within the fear, like, there's the issues with that. It's like, one, first of all, within the show, like, there's clearly veins of other emotions that run through all these entities. Like, you can see excitement in the vast. You can see love in the corruption and the flesh. You can see sadness in the lonely. Like, he says, oh, it's just fear, but, like, no, these other emotions are there, even if they're sort of undertones to the other fears. And that's part of what makes these each entity kind of distinct, is a lot of them have these motifs underlying them.
Right.
Like, there's nothing about, like with the Slaughter, it has the music motif. There's nothing really about mass violence that should be linked to music, but that makes it more interesting.
Well,
and
yeah,
you also
like,
got the fact
my
that,
favorite entity is the web, the spider, which the reason why that's my favorite entity, it's got nothing to do with what the fear the web represents. It's purely because I really like the spider motif that he has. Like, A Guest for Mr. Spider is my favorite episode so far. And it's just because I really like that spider theme that it has, even though the web is supposed to represent the fear of being controlled by something else.
Yeah.
And a web is kind of like puppet strings, but it's a method of hunting. Like, being totally literal, the spider should be associated with the hunt.
Or the corruption.
And I'm not just saying that because it's my favorite episode, and I have been overtaken by the hunt, I swear. But yeah, no, I mean, giving these entities these essentially unrelated but interestingly thematic connections helps flesh them out.
Or even having aspects of them that are, like, kind of different from each other, like having with the like we've talked about avatars. The Stranger kind of seems like it doesn't produce avatars at all, like it just produces monsters. Or having the Spiral just kind of be relatively unexplained compared to all the other entities with what it does. But so like I was saying, there are these undertones of other emotions with all of the fears, and there's also no reason, again, that fear should be completely malicious. Like, from an evolutionary perspective, getting into evolutionary psychology, fear is a emotion we need. Like, it keeps you safe. And also the whole, what I've talked about with the excitement and enrichment thing, like, you need to be able to, Is this something where I'm just gonna have to talk for a while because you have to fight?
No, I'm just. I mean, you're in the middle of something interesting, and I'm.
Oh,
Before,
so like, there's
if
no reason like fear has to be malicious. Like, it shouldn't be killing. Like death. A lot of times, like if somebody dies, they can't be afraid anymore. So if you've got an entity that feeds on fear, that like killing is not really a high priority, and
yeah,
like having a scary experience that you survive can be kind of fun and enjoyable. Like I realize that'd be a little off theme, but I think it'd be interesting. It would have been more interesting for the podcast if it kind of pressed more directly on the idea of monsters and of avatars, and
and I mean, I
this
disagree
gets
a
a little
little bit.
into
Like, I do think that Magnus Archives made what was ultimately the right choice for the style of writing it has, of having these entities be purely malicious. But the underlying explanation is definitely something they need to spend less time talking about because it just doesn't make any sense. That's not how fear actually works.
and like I think you would I think like you could keep the theme and the tone and press a little on the idea of there are monsters and avatars and art, and like maybe a little of this gets into sort of like literary theory of sort of like critical theory and queer theory. Monstrous bodies are othered bodies, and others are not something that are completely fictional. There are people,
Right.
minorities are othered by our society, and like even like so like a monster like is a not necessarily a one-to-one representation of a sexual or racial minority, but like there's going to be some sort of level of identity just because sexual and racial minorities are otherized. And even moving beyond that, like real people get otherized. Like for the longest time, the nerd was an outcast. Like it's kind of faded away. Like nerds used to be kind of outcast and otherized by our society. Goths used to be pretty otherized and outcast by our society. Sometimes people get otherized without there actually even being any underlying explanation. There's been kind of a tendency in recent years to, whenever somebody is sort of outcast, to be like, there's an underlying reason for that, and that's just not true. Like you look at wolf pack psychology, like, and sort of like going back to like sort of hunter-gatherer societies, like yeah, hunter-gatherers were really egalitarian and tightly knit. But the reason humans were like that is because hunter-gatherer groups are very small and they're very tightly interrelated. Once you start adding more people, even if it's a group that's still relatively closely related, relatively similar, people start to get outcast and otherized without really clearly definable reasons. Like if you look at like the history of sort of the witch trials, like there have been attempts by some people to try to explain this as like, oh, these were women who were it was women, it was people who were religious dissenters. I've seen some people claim that it was minorities, like that actually does not stand up to scrutiny. It's almost always the dominant ethnicity getting accused.
Yeah,
and
no,
like
witch
a lot of
trials.
times, explanation. Like only one person in the Salem witch trials was not a white woman, Tituba, and she is one of the people who did not end up getting executed. In Norway, this is a random fact, like 90% of the people accused are Norwegian women, and then the last 10% are Sami men, and like there is the aspect that it is this minority ethnicity, but it's still a minority of the who's accused. And a lot of the people who were accused, they were just outcasts. The people in the town did not like them. There wasn't really a reason. They were just disliked. Like some of these women would have been, got accused, just were disliked by the town. Some of them even sort of like tried to play up, oh, I might be a witch, as a way to have a little bit of social power. Like you might be like, we have stories where like these women admitted like, yeah, I said that because I wanted people to leave me alone, or I needed a little bit of money, and I thought threatened that I was a witch, that they'd give me the money. Like going into a much more modern experience, the ritual satanic abuse, like that's mostly just working class white people who got accused. Just sort of a random finger of God got pointed at them and said, "Oh, this person is a Satanist who's abusing children." If you look at like the West Memphis Three, like they stand out a little bit because they're they're goths, but like, you know, one of them, like Damien Eccles, lived in extreme poverty, but West Memphis is not a well-off area of Arkansas. Like, a lot of the people who got accused in the satanic ritual abuse scandals were just people who ran daycares. There's not anything about them that really would have led to them being
The museum. That was my event. Did you think I wouldn't find out?
been pointed out as being
Shut up.
different.
Control my sister as
So
long as she's out of the picture.
I realize I've gone on a huge tangent, but I'm going to loop this back around to the Magnus Archives. So, like,
all the others.
with these monsters, having some sort of ambiguity of their maliciousness makes it more interesting, makes it a little more grounded, because you get, like, you could have like with Daisy, like, ultimately she's kind of right with just pretty much everybody who is an avatar is bad, and you can justify killing them. Like, it makes her kind of scarier if actually there's a little bit of ambiguity over whether that is true or not. Like, if Michael Cruz is just scaring people and she shoots him anyways, because she has this very strict definition of what a human is. You cannot have any supernatural powers and qualify as a human. Like, that would be kind of scary. Like, that's a much more interesting monster hunter story than, well, she's kind of right. And also, you know, like, because you have, like Trevor
Daisy
and Julia fall
is
to the
clearly
hunt.
presented.
Like, having them just have been monster hunters rather than, oh, they're avatars of the hunt, that's why they're crazy. Having them just have been monster hunters who decided anybody who has any supernatural powers is abject and we can kill, rather than, oh, they're serving the hunt, would have been much more interesting and still as scary as, oh, they're avatars of the hunt now.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry to have gone on for like 10 minutes.
Well, I mean, there is a lot to be said, and, you know, like, I'm glad we got that on record. And, you know, it's with improv, stuff like this happens sometimes. But with Daisy in particular, she has this... She's supposed to be this homicidally unstable, you know, dangerous, violent wild card. But, like, you know, maybe it gets more into this later on, but, like, she never seems to do anything wrong. Like, she threatens Sims at one point, but then she never follows through on that, so that seems to have worked itself out.
And she killed Michael, but, you know...
But, yeah, Michael was a villain, so who cares?
He was bad.
Yeah, well, and that's the thing, like, you know, Daisy... Like, I get what they're trying to do with her, but I keep getting kind of annoyed with it, because, like, she reads to me as being basically Buffy the Vampire Slayer with a little bit more edge.
Like, it would have been much more interesting if Michael was that avatar of the past that I described, who just...
Right. Because then it would have been like, was killing him really justified? Like, on the one hand, there was no other way to stop him, and it's not like he was asking for people's consent or whatever. He is arbitrarily deciding whether or not this trauma is going to be worth it to them in the long run. On the other hand, like, it doesn't seem like it should be a capital crime, but it's also not something that we can really prosecute within the bounds of our justice system. And so Daisy does come across as perhaps justified, but also unhinged and dangerous. But if Michael's a murderer, then it's basically just like, well, he's a murderer who can't be judicially punished, so I guess Daisy did the right thing there. You know, that's an unfortunate situation she found herself in, but she acquitted herself as well as anyone could have been expected to.
And even, like, within the category of, like, monsters, like, I've always been really fascinated about trying to find a way to non-violently resolve when you have somebody who has some sort of dangerous thing that they need to stay alive. Like, with it, there was a game that Chamomile DM'd that I was in where there were will-o-wisps, and the will-o-wisps feed on fear, and my character spent a lot of time trying to figure out a way that they could still, you know, be able to exist and just mitigate the harm that comes from feeding on fear. And we kind of did reach a resolution with that, where they kind of got integrated into the kingdom.
Yeah. Relevantly to the Spoop Hotel, my favorite ghost story is always the one where the ghost, you know, just has some final wish that needs to be satisfied, and if you do that, then they just go away. Where, like, you know, the best way to deal with a haunting is to find out what is causing them this pain that tethers them to the mortal realm, and help them out.
Like, I'm a big fan of, like, restorative victories, where the victory isn't that the villain is defeated, the victory is the villain. Whatever is causing the villain to be a villain is resolved. Especially if it's like, like, so you have like vampires, they have to feed on blood. You can find a resolution to that doesn't just kill all vampires.
Right.
Uh,
And I will say, like, just for the record, this is not a realistic thing. The majority of real human villains are villains out of self-interest, out of a lack of concern for other people.
as we have learned, like,
Yeah.
in my defense, this has been like the past 4 years have kind of been like, oh, I was wrong.
Yeah. Like, I still find that story far more compelling. Like, that's a much more interesting story to tell. It's a good storytelling technique. But authors who say that this is the realistic thing, they are wrong. And it does irritate me whenever I hear that these days, because we have clearly seen that the most common cause for evil in the real world is just that there are people who do not care about the well-being of others.
Which
Yeah, that's
still is just so hard to wrap my head around. Like, I know, it's like,
Yeah,
I've got all this interiority that I assume, like if I do something wrong, like I know the sort of like or I'm wrong about something. It's like I know the set of circumstances and experiences and knowledge bases that led to this.
right.
But then Donald Trump got elected, and it seems like, okay, some people just want to hurt other people just for the sake of hurting them.
Which, I mean, there's definitely some people like that. And I might just be optimistic here, but like my belief is that it's not even that bad. It's just there are some people who are sufficiently apathetic to the well-being of others that they're willing to throw any number of people under the bus for the sake of their own pride. Just so they don't have to admit they were wrong. Which, that is a monstrous lack of empathy for other human beings. But I would not go so far as to say that their goal is to hurt other people, at least.
One thing to think about is sort of like net predators in nature. Like, a shark is dangerous, a tiger is dangerous, but that doesn't actually merit exterminating sharks or tigers. We just find a way to live with them in the world where, we mitigate the harm they can cause, and they have their sort of natural place in the world.
I love
like,
Randy Feltface's bit on sharks. Where it's like,
Wait.
oh, the shark's gone rogue. What? No, it hasn't. It's eating. It's just what millions of years of evolution are programmed to do. This is the most predictable thing in the world. It's, oh, yeah, but you come into our bit. What? Our bit? Yeah, no. You see that big wet bit? That's its bit. You see this dry bit that you're standing on with your legs? That's our bit.
Like, within the context of the Magnus Archives, the entities seem to be this natural thing that has existed since before humans did. Like, they presumably have had some role in shaping the evolution of life itself, because they've been around. Like, specifically that they were around since before humanity. Like, the older ones are driven by primal animal fears. So them just being bad, it just does not seem correct in the world that they've posited for us.
By the
I
way, I
think
guess...
you could have shown that without undermining the horror. Like, I don't think the
I definitely
resolution
think-
to the Magnus.
I definitely think someone could have written that. I'm not sure they could have written that. Like, I'm sympathetic to the idea that Jonathan Sims personally may not have been able to pull that off, because Jonathan Sims is the name of both the protagonist and the writer, so that's fun.
You don't say a word about father. Your heart still belongs to daddy after all these years, eh, sister?
Yeah, I just feel like if the ending of the Magnus Archives is the entity ceased to exist, I feel like that is a missed opportunity.
I was the one calling the shots. Bertram was
Yeah,
working on
I mean,
marriage. How does it feel to know that I beat you?
not only because that's, because fear is a good thing, but also because, like, if a plucky band of heroes can just obliterate all of these eldritch abomination fear entities, that kind of feels like, wow, why didn't we do this earlier?
Actually, I almost have like an image in my head of,
Isn't it obvious? I'm about
this
to
is kind of
win
weird,
this
this is not an ending, but just like, I have an image in my head of
that despite
looking at Earth and discussing the evolution of life on Earth and being like, all life on Earth as this symbiotic relationship with this this sort of psychic life form. Like, that is part of life on Earth, as Sims has posited it. Like,
Fear is one of the first emotions to develop, so far as we can tell. It's not, the science on this isn't totally settled. They keep going back and forth on it. But there do appear to be a lot of species of fish that feel fear but not pain.
that is really interesting.
Yeah. And it's, again, I do want to be clear, they keep going back and forth on whether or not fish can feel pain. They can definitely feel fear. Yeah, by the way, Therese and Jeanette are the same person. That whole plot happened while we were talking about the Magnus archives.